All right, let's look at, apparently, while I was gone, a couple people, including, we'll do tacos first because he got a funny voice. Breakfast tacos. He runs his own atheist presuppositional apologetics channel. Now, he did a review of me, and he called it Made by Jimbob Destroys Himself, but now I think Breakfast Tacos went a little too fast on this because he made some really fatal errors. We'll look at them now.
I know you know better than this. I watched this response that we're about to watch, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say. Your responses had me, how do I put this? Shocked and disappointed.
Argument against religion in reverse column. That might be interesting. Only 11.
This is argument against religion. I know a lot of people out there keep making videos where they do arguments against atheism and that type of thing. But I don't need multiple arguments. This is the only argument you'll ever need to destroy any creator God belief. This is going to be a very informational video, I feel like, because
premise one is okay.
This is going to be the strongest inductive anti-creator argument you've ever encountered. Now, this is what I've been running with atheist presuppositional apologetics. I lead from the Watchmaker.
Now, I don't know if you guys remember this. I did a short review of this. That's what he's reviewing. And he's saying, you know, everything that observed to exist arises from pre-existing stuff. He was called out by my whole chat, including me, because it forces into endless regress. And he says it doesn't. Well, it's simple. It does. Because if X starts from pre-existing stuff, that's just another X. And then that X needs to come from someplace. And that X needs to come from someplace. So if X is stuff, it always needs previous X constantly all the way back until where. But he's got a way bigger problem here that he exposes himself and doesn't realize it in this little exchange here. Or not exchange, in this little summary.
Analogy, which gets him to agree to premise one.
Rocks all the way down.
This.
Yeah, totally.
So first off, I have been arguing with atheists and theists alike for about a week now. And not one of them, not one, has provided anything substantial against premise one, which is what they would have to address. Now, keep in mind, not one person that I've ran this argument on has provided.
Well,
so premise one just...
Okay, right. Well, premise one assumes naturalism. So
oh, fuck Jimbob. Oh, right off the bat.
The forced laughter. Now, I appreciate some added rhetorical performance, tacos, but the laughter doesn't refute it. When you reduce everything to stuff, right, that's to say everything includes stuff. Stuff, in this sense, has to be material, right, physical. So you're starting with naturalism. You're starting with that there's stuff. It's not, you can't laugh it away.
Oh, bro. So
you can't say bro either. Laughter and bro doesn't handle it.
Premise one just assumes that you Jimbob, observe things and they exist, and those things that you observe that exist arises from pre-existing stuff.
No, that's not what premise one assumes. It's worse than that. Premise one assumes that the regularity, you'd have to say this is the defeater to his premise one. The regularity of nature is something that exists. Okay? Now, he has to tell me how stuff produces regularity of nature. But you can't do that because you need regularity to have stuff. In other words, you need the law of identity to hold true. And for the law of identity to maintain in a material sense, that even objects and their composition need to hold true, hold together, bond, not become other things, this kind of stuff. This is a law. So this is what these people forget. They engage with the material world and they say stuff exists, and they then say, well, when we talk about the regularity that is necessary for stuff to exist, that arises from stuff. It's delusional. The broke-ass laugh doesn't handle anything. He's done nothing. He just skipped it. He totally dodged the problem. That's what I would counter. That premise one is only going to work on a classical foundationalist, apologist, though that's a fan.
Jimbob, I am almost certain that you've seen some of my atheist presuppositional apologetics videos where I've ran it on other presuppers just like yourself and elucidated the truth to them that they already know. PMARS, for instance.
Yeah, PMARS maybe a presup, but if he's accepting the self-evident truths, then, he's not taking it far enough.
Who's actually read Greg Bonson's material. PMARS.
Jimbob.
He accepted this argument. Jimbob, you have no idea what you're talking about here.
Right. Fancy word for people. So his argument is, I've talked to other apologists. Therefore, you have no idea what you're talking about. Who sort of grant themselves a bunch of inferences, and they don't do presuppositional necessary preconditions. They just grant themselves the conditions. And here's the problem with premise one right off the bat. I don't know if you guys in the chat could add in what you think. I'll actually do it that way. Before I say what I think is the problem with premise one, let's go to the chat and see if you guys can whip up some counter or something you would say as a counter or some.
Oh, you got to go to the chat because you don't have an answer, huh?
No, that's not true. It's called engagement. It's called, I don't want my chat bored listening to what I think if they have some answers as well. And both of us had some answers.
You don't have one thing that you've observed that exists that's arisen from nothing.
No, that's question begging for first of all. All we needed to do, whether it was my chat or myself, Breakfast Tacos, to refute premise one is to present something that exists that's not stuff. That's the end of your argument, dude. As soon as someone presents something that exists that's not stuff, that you can't tell me how it arises from material, regularity of nature, right? Regularity, laws of thought, law of identity, knowledge, truth, meaning. You can't tell me where it arises from stuff.
Not one thing, Jimbob. That's why you got to go to the audience. How disappointing.
Now, I know that a lot of that's rhetorical, but it's just bad faith, uncharitable. It's just poisoning the well. For contention, premise one. It doesn't even matter, by the way. What would it matter? Let's say I didn't have a refutation at all. Let's say I was running a blank. Why would it matter if even I went to the chat? Why would it matter? It's as if this is a genetic fallacy he's running. It's a genetic fallacy anyway. It's not even true, but even if I granted it, let's say I was dumbfounded by premise one. Even if I appeal to the chat, it doesn't have anything to say about the validity of the contention. One, which is everything that is observed to exist arises truth comes from truth from particles. Pre-existing stuff. It's a big assumption. Premise one infers infinite regress. Correct. That's a counter. It is correct.
Bro. Oh, fuck. You listen to your audience and you agreed with a fucking idiot who has no idea what he's saying. Bro. So, premise one has nothing to do with an infinite regress. In fact, I already covered this.
Of course it does. You're saying a claim about things how they come to be. If things that exist, which is stuff, arises from pre-existing stuff. That's infinite regress.
Premise one is simply that everything that is observed to exist arises from pre-existing stuff. It's so simple.
How are you not seeing how simple it is that that runs to infinite regress?
Everything that's ever been observed that exists arises from pre-existing stuff.
Right. And the pre-existing stuff, right? This is another problem. You don't observe everything that exists because the pre-existing stuff that produced the current stuff that you can observe, you can't observe. Dummy. It also rejects the past.
There's never been one thing
Thank you so much, Rachel. Appreciate that.
Observed that exists.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
That arose from nothing.
Blah, blah,
Not
blah,
one
blah,
thing,
blah.
Jimbob.
Yes, there is.
That's all that would be required to defeat premise one.
I already defeated it in the first video, dude. Truth exists. Knowledge exists. Mind exists. You can't tell me how it arises from material, dude. At all. I often get the feeling when I'm thinking every thought I have ever had has been thought by someone else before. Am I alone in that? Well, there might be something true about that because you don't really own your thoughts in a sense, and not talking about property, saying that your thoughts don't, especially from a theistic view, they really aren't necessarily sourced from you. Like you don't there's not like some new creative unique thought. So you're kind of right in that because we're limited. If humans are limited in their reasoning, logic, even their knowledge, position of knowledge, and we're constrained, well, then there's a limitation of thought. So it's not a huge strike against being a human, by the way. Wayward $2, thank you. God bless you as well. All right, let's see. This is I won't put you through the torment of watching this whole thing because it gets defeated very early on.
Instead, you agree with some dingleberry in your chat
That's not an argument.
That premise one leads to an infinite regress.
It does.
You have no idea what you're talking.
That's not a counter. That's just Yelp reviewing. That's doing meta summary. Saying someone is an idiot in the chat or saying someone has no idea what they're talking about is a cope. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't counter anything.
Talking about. Run that in Chat GPT real quick.
Run that in Chat GPT. Yeah.
When my mom eats rocks, it's kind of like she goes to La La Land. She doesn't seem to be paying attention to anything going on around her.
It assumes also existence itself is fundamentally and only, quote, stuff. Right, Westward. Well, propositions don't exist. Ontology is reduced to material.
This is talking about your observations, Dingleberry.
Can we observe the past? Does the past exist? Did a past exist? Even premise one assumes a pre-existing thing called the past. This is what's so funny. You can't observe pre-existing stuff. It's gone. It's the end of your argument. You can't observe propositions as items. They're not stuff. You can't observe meaning. This is like the lowest tier. Breakfast tacos. I'm glad that you admit that you're a shitty philosopher. Now, I know that gives you a shield so you don't have to be held to account, but you really are. So not everything that exists we observe. So if there's anything that we do observe, we could say it exists. But there are things that you could list that exist in a sense, like knowledge, that we don't observe.
That doesn't actually exist.
Uh-oh. The end of his argument. Actually. Now listen very closely, everybody. Everything that is observed to exist arises from pre-existing stuff. Knowledge doesn't exist. This is like Matt Dillhunty's take on the mind, right? If knowledge doesn't exist, there's no account of pre-existing stuff because that's a knowledge claim about the past that you can't observe. Now you have pre-existing stuff you have no access to, buddy. It's the end of your argument. It's a complete disaster. A complete fucking train wreck. He's not thinking about the consequences of the positions he's taking, like knowledge that we don't observe.
That doesn't actually exist, though, in the term that we're using here in this argument.
Great, so your argument doesn't exist. Done for. It's absolutely done, dude. Done. Whether you accept this or not, your entire position is self-obliterated.
That's an equivocation in that you're using the definition of a word that's not the same definition that's being used in the argument, right?
What's an argument? Is an argument stuff? You keep assuming these things like arguments exist. Does an argument emerge from pre-existing stuff?
And so what you're doing is you're saying that because I'm using a different colloquial version of the word exist, it's the same thing as the philosophical definition that's being used in the...
No, we're talking about everything. Now watch how he contradicts himself. Listen to what he just said. He rejected that knowledge exists, and I'm using knowledge in a framework that's not identical to the framework of stuff, right? But we're talking about everything here. Everything. I pointed to something that exists, that he has to say exists, or he says it doesn't exist. If he says it does exist, knowledge, it's no longer... everything no longer is reduced to stuff. If he rejects that knowledge exists, he rejects his own argument.
The argument. And it's not, Jimbob, because knowledge does not exist in the sense that you think it does.
And does it exist at all? I don't care about the sense. We're talking about everything, right? You're basically saying if we don't observe knowledge, then that's not in the universe. If this is where I would clap back at him, right? It would destroy his premise one. That's right. Premise one assumes anything that exists is something you could observe, or is stuff. That's the key one. He's going to end it right now. Stuff is very nebulous. What do you mean stuff?
Stuff does a lot of work, bud. So stuff incorporates everything that exists.
Does knowledge exist? He's back to does knowledge exist? So this guy, he's like a sophist, but he doesn't know he's a sophist. So he's now back to, well, stuff includes non-stuff, like knowledge. Again, he's back to the dilemma of either rejecting that knowledge exists, which his argument is done, or accepting that knowledge exists and it's no longer in the category of stuff. By the way, without going to knowledge, the past itself, which premise one assumes, is not found as stuff. You have no observation of the past. So it's over without the appeal to knowledge.
Stuff means some type of physical substrate. It could be
a physical
material things.
Uh-huh.
It is an all-inclusive term for things that exist.
Except for truth and knowledge and the laws of thought and meaning and the past, right? So the past doesn't exist. Knowledge doesn't exist. Truth doesn't exist. The laws of thought doesn't exist. The mind doesn't exist. Just stuff. It's dumb. I mean, this is the end of the argument already. So I would agree that anything material. So that's the end of that for Tacos. Unfortunately, he doesn't understand.